want to welcome all those folks joining us online or in the YouTube channel to this Sunday morning, May the 15th, 2022. We are glad that you're part of our online community and pray God's blessing on the reading of the scripture and the message this morning. Larry, please.
This is the story of Jesus walks on the water. Then Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side of the lake, while he sent the people away. After sending the people away, he went up to a hill by himself to pray. When evening came, Jesus was there alone. And by this time, the boat was far out in the lake, tossed about by the waves because the wind was blowing against it. Between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to the disciples walking on the water. When they saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and screamed with fear. Jesus spoke to them at once. "Courage," he said. "It is I. Don't be afraid." Then Peter spoke up. "Lord, if it is really you, order me to walk out on the water to you." "Come," answered Jesus. So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water to Jesus. But when he noticed a strong wind, he was afraid and started to sink down in the water. "Save me, Lord," he cried. At once Jesus reached out and grabbed hold of him and said, "What little faith you have. Why did you doubt?" They both got into the boat and the wind died down. Then the disciples in the boat worshiped Jesus. "Truly, you are the Son of God," they exclaimed. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Larry, for that dramatic rendition. At least a little drama, anyways. It was the perfect weekend for sailing trip down through the Strait of Juan de Fuca off the west coast. Straddling the U.S.-Canada border on the U.S. side is this string of San Juan Islands. And there's a little island there called Susha Island. It's only 564 acres, but it's a marine park. So the only way you get there actually is just by a personal motorcraft or sailboat. We had sailed there the day before, and the next morning, after mooring overnight, we awoke to clear blue skies, warm air, and we were motoring out of the little Susha harbor there, and there was a pod of killer whales going up the strait there, just ahead of us. It was just so magical. What could be better in life than sailing in the Gulf Islands and the San Juan Islands? We were out with a seasoned sailor, Harold Redecrop, who was a great friend of ours in Lillooet. He was the one who was the skipper. We called him Skipper. He liked to be called Skipper when he was on a boat. And I didn't mind calling him that. I didn't think of him as skipper of Gilligan's Island, you know, where things would go awry. And then we had our son, Tim, who I think was around 15 about that time. And then we had, along with us, twin boys, 10 years old, who we were fostering. And they didn't have much adventure in their life, and so we thought, this is a wonderful time for, you know, the men in the family to go out sailing and just to bond together and just to enjoy creation. That was pretty cool, I must say. And we're on this sailboat. It's probably, I think, about a 27-footer. But when we were about halfway back to our destination in a little marina close to Bellingham, everything changed. You know, these huge black thunderclouds rolled in very, very quickly. There were no other boats in sight. Everyone apparently recognized there was a storm coming except Skipper, our skipper. But we had to go back, right? It was too late to go back to Susha Harbor, and we were already heading in this direction. So batten down the hatches, basically. And then the winds came, and the waves started really pounding us. And it felt, at least to me, when you're in the middle of those kind of situations, like we were a little cork in a bathtub with a 2-year-old splashing water all around. You know what that might feel like? And we were the cork in the middle of these I would say there were probably 2-meter waves at that point. Now, it was exhilarating, and Skipper loved this because the faster you could go on a sailboat, that was his mojo. Like he was behind the wheel, and the sail was full out, and the jib sail was full out, and so we were roaring. I don't know how fast you're going in a sailboat in the middle of a storm. He was exhilarated. I was terrified. I mean, I wasn't just responsible for myself. We had our son there with us and 2 foster kids. Can you imagine what that would have been like if something had happened? I mean, really had happened? They were down below. What's that?
It was the very first week we had them.
It was the very first week we had them. So, anyways, it was more than they bargained for, more than I bargained for. So as the waves are tossing us up and down, and you're not making much headway in this storm, the jib sail at the front rips, and so it's flapping around like this, which means it's becoming a problem, and it needs to come down. Well, the skipper is at the wheel. There's no way he's going to relinquish the wheel. So what do you think needs to happen? Yeah, he says, Ed, you and Tim are going to have to go out on the bow and take the jib sail down. I'd never taken a jib sail down. Tim had never taken a jib sail down. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. Anyways, here we are. We're going out, and I was holding on to, we were both flat on our bellies going out on the bow. And in a sailboat, the bow was actually quite a distance ahead, right? And so I'm holding on to his ankles because there was no way you can stand up, and I was afraid that he didn't have enough strength. If I was up the jib sail, he wouldn't have enough strength to hold me from going overboard. So I was holding him by his ankles while he is struggling to take down the jib sail. It was probably the most scary 10, 15 minutes of my life. I was starting to think of my last will and testament, as you probably could imagine, right? Now, how many of you love adventure? Okay, there's a few. Okay. I'm thinking of you, the next sail trip I'm taking in the high waters. Well, many of us like to be safe and secure. When you're younger, like these 2 guys at the back, right? You love adventure, right? You think you're invincible, and you guys are invincible, right? That's how many of us think. But then, at a certain point, I don't know what that magic age number is. Well, look, Nancy, you put your hand up. You love adventure too. But I'd say the adventure that you like now is a little different from what you may have liked when you were a tad younger. But do you ever actually think that God is a God who loves adventure as well? Look around and you think and you realize the universe, in actual fact, is a very adventurous place. If you think of it in different kind of terms, exploding stars, rushing comets, gaseous expansions, black holes that they were able to capture in infrared recently, right? They got those pictures. Look at some of the creatures God has created. Lions and grizzly bears, white sharks, deadly snakes. Like, this is not a safe world that God created. Isn't that true? I mean, there is safety in one sense, but in actual fact, God has created this world not to be too safe. And there's a reason for that, I think. Because I actually think that all of these things, including storms on the water, hurricanes, volcanoes, reveal that we live in this world that God has created where God actually likes adventure. And look at Jesus' life. He didn't lead a tame life, but one filled with adventure from dawn to dusk oftentimes. Most of us know that we are really most alive in the adventure of life. Not necessarily in the quiet, safe, risk-free world we tried so hard to create for ourselves and our families at our age, not your age or Rosie's age, but many of us over 60 like to kind of have this little bubble life, bubble world around us, right? That's how we feel safe, and we feel like we're in control of that small part of our lives. Sometime back, I think it was 2013, a man named Bob Steele down in Australia celebrated his 90th birthday by bungee jumping from the tallest bridge, I think, where they had down in Australia, a bungee jump. He loved adventure, and some people are born, even at 90 apparently, to just keep pushing the edge of adventure and thrill in their life. And so he jumped off, and bounced, and then at the end they had television cameras there recording all of this, because not many 90-year-olds go bungee jumping. And so afterwards, they interviewed him, and he said, in response to the question, "How are you feeling?" He says, "I'm cold and I'm tired, and give me my teeth back, please." Now, most people, of course, like some adventure. And that is until maybe it gets a little too scary, or you get pushed beyond your comfort zone, because everyone has a little bit of a comfort zone. At a certain point, it moves from adventure to being very scared. That's what happened that day with the disciples. Everything was going great with this adventure with Jesus. They'd been with him as he was healing people, as he was giving these Sermon on the Mount, hundreds or maybe thousands of people drawn to Jesus, and he was doing miracles that they'd never experienced before. Don't forget, all the disciples in the wider group who were followers of Jesus were just, for the most part, plain, simple farm people or fisher people, right? They lived on kind of a safe, well, it wasn't safe necessarily even in those days, but at least a kind of a normal life. And now Jesus is taking on this adventure, and they never knew what would happen day to day. I mean, it probably was very exciting for them. People, as I say, were being healed, freed from oppression, depression, all of these things. And they were really pumped for the next thing. And so Jesus, after preaching that day, he says, "Guys, go ahead of me across the Sea of Galilee, and I'm going to preach over there in a day or two. I'll meet you." They didn't really know how Jesus was going to get there. It's not like they had water taxis, but Jesus could do anything, so they listened to him. Now, they set off in the late afternoon, and it looked like smooth sailing. No risk whatsoever. Many of the men in the boat were fishermen who had sailed those waters for years, so they were pretty comfortable in a boat on the open water. However, when a storm came up in the middle of the night, they became afraid. Fishermen who knew those waters and had been on stormy seas before, they were afraid. Remember that passage that Larry read? But the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, let's go back, and I want you to think of a time in your life when you were actually really scared. I mean, scared to move, for us, out onto the bow of that 27-foot sailboat. Like, I was really scared out there while Tim was slowly, lowering the jib sail. Maybe you were really scared going to your first job interview. Or you were scared on the first day of class, maybe it was university, or you still can remember kindergarten, and you were terrified maybe to go to that very, very different experience. Maybe you were scared to go on your first date, or any number of things that sometimes cause us, your stomachs to kind of start to roll like open waters. For others of you, you might have been going on a big roller coaster at Disneyland, or whitewater rafting, or bungee jumping, and that's where your kind of fear level was heightened. For many of us now who find ourselves quite a bit older, our fears can be walking on an icy sidewalk in the winter months. Talk about going on an adventure, right? Monica and our others, our Calgary friends in particular, we know that. But this is the thing. You see, Jesus invites us into an adventure with him. But almost always the adventure we're on means we're going to have to take some new risks and confront some of our fears as we step out in faith to follow him and to be led by Jesus. You see, there are no achievements made, no goals realized, no advances made for the kingdom of God in our lives personally or corporately as churches unless people are willing to take some risks and face their fears. Every time God asks you to do something beyond your comfort zone, you'll have to face your fears and step out in faith by saying yes to God. Every time God calls our church collectively to do something a little bit risky, or something that isn't always, you can't plan for every kind of eventuality, we're going to be faced with a choice that will often raise our level of discomfort, and yes, maybe even cause us some sleepless nights or some fear. Now, here in our church in Coombs and with our online community friends, we are sensing, I think, God's Spirit moving in ways we might not have experienced for a few years. And these might just indicate that we're at the onset of a new adventure that God is calling us to take some tentative steps forward. And God, I think, wants our church, and every church, I would hope, to have a bright future that will bear spiritual fruit, not just in the lives of the people in the congregation or online, but in the community around. Most adventures in churches mean that there's going to be some uncertainties or there's going to be challenges. Now, as we all know, we come out of a pretty rough few years. During the past 2 years through COVID-19 pandemic, we've lost some of our deepest connections with folks in the church. Add to these the fact that many of you folks in our church family and others, that are listed frequently on our prayer list have gone through some pretty tough times. They've lost significant things. Health issues have come up. They've lost people they love. They've gone through tough job searches, any number of things that can happen when you go through something like a pandemic. But on the flip side, we've also been blessed with many new folks who've joined us either in person or through Zoom and have enriched our community of faith and our life together. Thanks to your generosity, we're financially strong. We have more energy and human resources than we've had perhaps in previous years. These new folks, many of you here today, have brought us joy and laughter as well as your own special gifts that have kind of helped to enrich our lives and help to enrich our church life as well. And so that gives us kind of a little more confidence to pursue God's new vision or God's dreams and what God wants for us in the years ahead. Now, of course, we don't want to squander this special time in the life of our fellowship. And I hope that you, or you like me, want to seek God's new vision and plans for your life personally or for our church in ways that might be life-giving to our congregation and life-giving to the communities around us. So we need to see how we can be more outward focused, how we can use technology in new ways to connect us or to reach new people. We want to see if there are opportunities to discover a new path forward in order to be a healthy and vibrant congregation for many years ahead. Now, of course, I'm happy to say that we've got an excellent team of leaders who are working on thinking and praying through tentatively about what that future might look like. The council established a visioning team comprising of Rick Roberts over there, David Finley here, Janet Boley, Joe Dunn over in the back pews there, and myself. Under the guidance of the council, that group is tasked with looking at the challenges before us, as well as looking at some opportunities that now present themselves to us. And over the next few months, you're going to be invited to join in that process of discernment, to offer your wisdom and your suggestions and your passion and your joy. Now, one thing that spurred me on to ask the council to form such a group was the fact that before us, there's these opportunities, but there's some threats to ongoing work here in our church. One thing I'm keenly aware of is my age and what might happen if I suffered some illness, got swept overboard in another sailing incident, right? Any number of things could happen. How would ministry keep moving forward? Now, don't think I'm talking about being indispensable to God's work here. I am not, guaranteed. But I am realistic as well and know that any number of things can go sideways quite easily in life. And so it's prudent for a congregation to prepare for those things. We're not going to be worried about it and we're not going to, stress over those things. But let's admit it, at one point, you're going to have to replace me when I get to be 92. I think that's the day. Didn't you say that, Rick? Something like that, right? Yeah. You're going to want to replace me much earlier than that, I guarantee you. Ask Connie. Yeah. Now, as much as I'd like to give you a pep talk like a Tony Robbins rally, Tony Robbins, that inspirational, motivational speaker, or I'd love to, say, don't worry, be happy, there's no problems, we're going to take some new steps, and it's all going to work out nice. Or I'm going to have you buy my book, and there's 3 steps to success no matter what hits you. Well, you know what? I've been around the block enough, and I've listened to a lot of, inspirational speakers, but I recognize that, there aren't 3 easy steps to the next adventure that God calls you onto. There's never such a thing as risk-free living. We don't live in a world like that anymore. Look at this pandemic. Well, probably, yes, some people saw the pandemic coming, right? But most people were oblivious to how the pandemic would have such a widespread impact, an ongoing impact, right? Like here we are 2 years down the road. We had, folks in our church get COVID-19, and it wasn't an easy thing to get over. And we know that that's going to continue, not just in Canada, but we see China, and we know that there are other places in the developing world who are going to be affected by the pandemic for years ahead. Who saw those kind of things, the massive stress that it would create and the problems? Very few. But if we fail to discern the time and challenges as well as the opportunities, because you see, through every challenge, I believe God creates a place of an opportunity. We were just talking with Bern and Nancy about, Andrew and Helen and Connor. That's their kids and grandson up in Northwest Territories. Wow. Having to rebuild after a flood. I mean, we went through that in Calgary. It didn't really affect many of us because we lived high enough above the floodplains, but it affected a lot of people. And we know what that was like for individuals when you lose a home or you have your basement flooded out and all the memories are gone, all of the stuff that you had downstairs. We know that Andrew and Helen and Connor are going to face, real tough times ahead, rebuilding. They had so many wonderful things going for them. Isn't that right, Bert and Nancy? You'd just gone up there last year to build this great greenhouse that would have helped to feed, thousands of people, right? It wasn't just for themselves. And now all of those things have to be rebuilt, and not just them, but so many others. In the midst of all of that, Andrew is a person of faith, and mom and dad are people of faith, and they're always looking for something good that might come out of a difficult situation. And we're praying for them to find that silver lining or something good that will come out of the worst situations in life. I was listening to Sunday Morning this morning, and some of you know of World Food Kitchen. Have you heard of that organization? I don't remember the Spanish cook that started it. It probably started, I think he said, in the Haiti earthquake. So that was in 2011, something like that. And he just saw the massive need in Haiti, the devastation, and people without food and water. And he said, you know what, I'm a chef. I can go down and help those people. And so he started this organization, and now they go all over the world where there's a disaster. Now they're in Ukraine, feeding all those starving people who just need someone not only to feed them, but to give them encouragement and to say, you know what, we're going to be here with you in this time of great pain and stress and confusion and bloodshed, right? So sometimes it's even in terrible things, good people start to come. And that's what he was saying. He was saying what he has experienced is in the worst of times, you find that in actual fact, it brings out for many people the best in them. And that's what I expect will happen in Northwest Territories, floods, and in other places around the country. If we fail to discern the time and challenges as well as the opportunities, we will have missed the chance to help new people experience the adventure with Jesus. We'll have missed potential opportunities to impact the wider community, and will ultimately be a much smaller, more insular group of people. By necessity, all of us are going to have to release some things that we might have held dear for some time in order to pursue God's new vision together. We'll have to do the deep work of listening to one another. We'll have to keep an open mind and heart and draw deeper into our relationship with Jesus to give us the spiritual tools and resources necessary to make the kind of course adjustments that we have to do personally and together as a church. You see, the adventure Jesus is calling us to take together as a church means all of us from different backgrounds and traditions will have to move out of our comfort zones and take some new steps of faith. But that's such a biblical thing to do. You see, no one who ever followed Jesus when he walked this earth came along without leaving something behind. No one who ever followed Jesus lived without some fear and some risk. That is the price you have to pay for following Jesus. Because if you're not doing that, I guarantee you're probably not following Jesus. Jesus is always out ahead of us, leading us in those places of discomfort sometimes. Sometimes it's beautiful, of course, let's admit it. But frequently, Jesus is always pushing us to grow deeper in our spiritual lives, to grow deeper in our character, to bear more fruit, all of those things that he wants for us personally and for church communities as well. And the rewards of kind of stepping into your fear, getting out of the comfort zone, is that in actual fact you find out that Jesus meets you there, exactly where he needs you to be. And you even then, taking those new steps, get to walk on water. You see, when Jesus called Peter to step out of the boat and walk on water, was that a risky thing? Well, of course. It's one thing to jump off a dock, and know the dock is there. Or even if you're in the Caribbean sailing and to jump off the boat and to know the boat is there to save you. But remember, you're back in the first century. They didn't have life preservers, and it's a very stormy night. And so no one wants to get out of that boat because they know what's going to happen. They'll sink and die. So when Jesus called Peter to step out of the boat, it was risky. Why would anyone risk the comfort and safety of the boat to go on the water? And some here today might say, I like this little church the way it is. I'm not asking for a vote of hands. I want church to change only in the ways that will not make me uncomfortable. These options might be a little too unrealistic and may not get us to where we need to go together. On that stormy night, Peter faced his fears, relinquished his comfort and safety, and took those first hesitant steps out of the boat. And amazingly, God met him there in that new adventure and became the second person to walk on water. Peter allowed his faith and trust in Jesus to grow stronger rather than succumbing to his fears or need to be comfortable. And the thrill of walking with Jesus on the water enabled Peter to take some greater risks later in his life when it would be crucial for the expansion of the church. If Peter hadn't taken that very risky step with Jesus on the water, maybe he wouldn't have been the risky apostle willing to take some big risks to build Jesus' kingdom on earth in those first months and years after Jesus' death and resurrection. Faith in Jesus is a commitment to stretch yourself, to regularly move out of your comfort zone and to discover something never before experienced. Now, I found that in my life, that in order to live fully and freely, to live in the adventure of life that God longs for me to experience, I have to continuously take new risks and trust God more and more. But I found as I've taken sometimes those hesitant first few steps, God has met me each time and helped me to grow my faith and to kind of grow as a person as well. And I've discovered, like Peter did, when he risked it all, that when you step out of your boat, your comfort zone, if you will, that's where the power of God is truly to be found. As soon as Jesus said that word to Peter, come, the power of Jesus to do the impossible, to walk on the water, was available to that disciple. It wasn't before, and it wasn't available to those who stayed in the boat, but it was available on the wild water. Jesus is asking each of us to trust him more in our lives so that we can discover his incredible power to overcome all our fears related to the uncertain path that might be before us, either personally or collectively, online family as well as the church family here. God calls us to keep stepping out of the boat in order to join Jesus where? On the water, where he's waiting for us. Because it's out on the stormy water where we have the chance to experience personal and collective growth and to partner with Jesus in the adventure of transforming lives and changing the world for his sake and glory.